This Friday, April 30th, will conclude President Biden's first 100 days in office. And so far, the Dow is up 10% since January 20th. Yahoo Finance's Jared Blikre took a look at the last century and compared the first 100 days of each president. Jared, what did you find?
Well, I'll tell you what, let's get the Wi-Fi interactive up because I went all the way back to Warren G. Harding. Everybody remembers the Harding administration, right? Well, he died early on and Calvin Coolidge, Cool Calvin, took over for him. And this is the returns of the Dow in the first 100 days of every president going back to Warren G. Harding. And because Cool Calvin took over for Harding, we wait for his reelection, and then we take the first 100 days of that. Is it perfect? No, but it's a little bit less apples to oranges. And of course, the outlier in the group is FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, up 80% in his first 100 days. We can take a deeper look at that if we have time. But I want to get to the most recent presidents, the presidents of this century. And I'll go through the average from George W. Bush through Joe Biden. What we have so far, the average is up about 6%. And that average is not just these four. It goes all the way back to 1921. And it is skewed a bit by that FDR outperformance. So the median is only 2%. But I just want to demonstrate the point that it's all contextual. Presidents inherit certain problems as well as tailwinds, and these guide the market. And 100 days is admittedly a short period of time. Just going back to our previous chart here, I do note that going back to Ronald Reagan, all of them were positive except for Obama, who, of course, inherited the great financial crisis. So we'll get to him in a second, but I just want to outline what happened with George W. Bush. So he came into office. We had the dot-com bubble bursting, and so it was a rough go for his first few years. Of course, later on that year, he'd also have to deal with 9/11, but he managed to climb into the green by the end. Now, Obama was a different story. In his first 100 days, we got the plunge to the 666 S&P 500 low, but then the Federal Reserve unleashed QE, what I call QE bazooka or bazooka QE, and it was off to the races. And that was the longest bull market by some definitions in history. And of course, the market never looked back after that. Now, Trump really didn't have any huge drawdowns. There was a 20% intraday correction later in his term, I believe in late 2018, that December, we remember that. But he managed to finish with some decent returns in the first 100 days there. And then finally, Joe Biden. Let's check this out. Now, it's been off to the races since the election, and arguably you can also do the analysis from that standpoint, which we've done in the past, not with Biden, but we'll be doing that as well. And Biden so far is number 2. So he's up 10% so far. We'll have to see what happens into the end of the week. That's when the first 100 days terminates.
And Jared, what about that outlier, FDR? So the Dow was up 80% his first 100 days. What's behind that?
Well, I'll tell you what, it got off to an interesting start. If we could go back to the Wi-Fi interactive, I actually have the Dow's performance throughout the year of 1933. Now, the Dow had previously been at 140, and it sunk to 40 points. Now, that is an historic low because that's 90% of the Dow being erased. When he was first in office, he closed the banks and the markets for 2 weeks. And that represents this little jump here, which is actually a pretty big jump because you can see after it filled the gap here back to the prior levels when he was, just before he was inaugurated, it was off to the races. Now, the market really wouldn't take off for years later, and we did have a double dip depression in 1938, but that's another story. Another interesting historical landmark, I think, is Ronald Reagan, 1981. That kicked off a huge, basically 10-year bull market. His first 100 days return were 2.8%, but you can see after that just kind of sank. And in fact, the market wouldn't bottom until the following year, 1982. So just kind of an historical example, a few of these here. I think the big takeaway for me is the president is not the stock market. Despite Trump, of course, who kind of brought things into the modern era. But Biden doesn't seem to be fixated on the Dow and S&P prices the way his predecessor is. So I think we're getting back to a situation where the market is more looking at the general economic backdrop as that is progressing and going on, guys.
Jared, absolutely. The president is not the stock market. Jared Blikre, fascinating research. Thanks so much.